Per usual, Dana White took to Instagram to announce more massive fights for the UFC, and this time it was surrounding the UFC 323 card, which may just be the final pay-per-view in UFC history, and that is UFC 323 going down at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, the home of the UFC, on December 6th. Which, fun fact, actually isn't the last event of 2025. There's actually a fight night on December 13th that's headlined by Brandon Royval and Manel Kape, which, by the way, is relevant considering one of the fights that we're going to talk about is for the flyweight title. But I'm rambling. Let's jump into the fight announcements. Merab Dvalishvili gets his wish and will get the opportunity to make history by becoming the first man or woman to ever defend a championship 4 times in one calendar year. He kicked off 2025 by defending his bantamweight championship for the first time after defeating Sean O'Malley in September of last year to become the champ, and he did so at UFC 311 by defeating Umar Nurmagomedov, who was undefeated at that point. Then fast forward to UFC 316 in June in Newark, New Jersey, where he would defeat Sean O'Malley in their rematch, and this time leave no doubt he wouldn't allow it to go to the scorecards, and he would submit Sean O'Malley late in the 3rd round. And then fast forward once more on October 4th, just a couple of weeks ago at the time I'm recording this, UFC 320, where he would get a unanimous decision win over Corey Sandhagen, and at that point, it was a wrap. It was over. Merab Dvalishvili was the 2025 Fighter of the Year, hands down, bar none, no questions asked. There's not even a close second place right now. And then Merab said, hold my beer. I'm going to really solidify it, and I'm going to have one of the biggest years in the entire history of the company. And that would be 4 title defenses in 1 year, and to do so, he will be getting a rematch against a former UFC bantamweight champion, someone that he absolutely dominated in their first fight back in 2023, and that is Petr No Mercy Yan, who since that loss to Merab has tallied off 3 consecutive victories in a row. So entering this fight, these two will have fought 8 combined times since their first meeting, all 8 of them being victories. And there really is no one else that is a number 1 contender for Merab's throne right now, so Petr Yan was absolutely the next man up to get the opportunity, because the 3 wins that he has since losing to Merab, Song Yadong, the currently ranked number 5 ranked bantamweight, Deiveson Figueiredo, the former flyweight champion and current ranked number 6 bantamweight, and Marcus McGee, most recently back in Saudi Arabia in July. And yes, Marcus doesn't have the name value as the 2 other guys, and he doesn't have a big ranking number next to his name, but at that point he was, I believe, number 12 or number 13, and Petr Yan was taking a massive risk by fighting back in the rankings, similar to how he did the same risk against Sean O'Malley earlier in his career, where it didn't pay off as good for him as it did this time. So he had fought a mixture of pretty much everybody you would want to see someone fight in the bantamweight division in order to earn himself a second crack at Merab, and this time it will be with the bantamweight championship on the line, an opportunity for Merab to make history by defending the belt 4 times in 1 year, and for Petr Yan to become a 2-time bantamweight champion. And I've talked about this a lot recently, but right now, on October 14th when I'm recording this, we are in the midst of a bantamweight marathon going on, because Merab kick-started it at UFC 320 on October 4th by defending his title. At UFC Rio, the aforementioned Deiveson Figueiredo defeated Montel Jackson, who was number 15 and was on a 6-fight win streak at that point. Deiveson riding a 2-fight losing streak heading into UFC Rio, so a massive bounce back for him to hold his spot in the top 10. At UFC Vancouver on October 18th, we're going to see the number 7 ranked Marlon Chito Vera, the former title challenger, taking on the number 9 ranked Ayman Zahabi, who is on a 6-fight win streak right now. And at UFC 321 on October 25th, we're going to see the former title challenger, the aforementioned Umar Nurmagomedov, who will be entering that fight coming off of his loss to Merab, taking on the number 8 ranked Mario Bautista, who is on the 2nd longest win streak in the bantamweight division right now, second to only, well, of course you guessed it, Merab. So there are a lot of moving pieces right now going on at bantamweight, and then when you factor in that this fight will be taking place on December 6th, just a little over 1 month removed from all of those fights we just talked about, 2025 proved to be a pretty big year for the bantamweight division, and it's possible that 2026 could be that much bigger. And from one dominant champion in Merab Dvalishvili at 135 to another dominant champion down a weight class at 125, we will see Alexandre Pantoja look to hold his spot amongst the throne at flyweight, taking on Joshua Van, who has the opportunity to become the second youngest UFC champion in modern history, only behind John Bones Jones. Alexandre Pantoja will enter this fight riding an 8-fight win streak, having not tasted defeat since July of 2020, and all of those 8 victories are against top 15 opponents, including Manel Kape, Brandon Royval twice, Brandon Moreno, Alex Perez, Steve Erceg, Kai Asakura, and Kai Kara France most recently back at UFC 317 on International Fight Week in June. And as a matter of fact, not only will he be riding an 8-fight win streak heading into this title defense, but he will be riding a 2-fight submission victory streak over the aforementioned Kais, Asakura, and Kara France. And it will be Pantoja's opportunity to say that he will have defended his title 5 times, because right now he's done it 4 times successfully after defeating Brandon Moreno in July of 2023 to become the champion. But standing in the way of Pantoja continuing to solidify himself as the second best flyweight of all time outside of Demetrius Johnson is Joshua Van, who is riding a 5-fight win streak right now and coming off the heels of the fight of the year so far in 2025. Back on the same night that Pantoja defended his belt for the 4th time, Brandon Royval would go toe-to-toe for 15 minutes against Brandon Raw Dog Royval in a blood and guts rock'em sock'em robots war. And that was Joshua Van's 3rd fight of 2025, and he went from number 12 all the way up to number 1 in the rankings after defeating the former title challenger Royval. And now in what will be his 4th fight of 2025, he will look to get gold wrapped around his waist at the young age of 24 and become the first UFC champion ever to represent the nation of Myanmar. This fight is going to be an absolute banger. It's fireworks guaranteed. They are going to go toe-to-toe for 25 minutes or less. The Cannibal versus the Fearless one in Joshua Van. Can Pantoja get a 5th ruby added onto his flyweight belt, or will Joshua Van make history and dethrone the second most dominant champion in flyweight history? And of course, this is a big-time future discussion for December 7th in the aftermath of this UFC 323 card, but I'm going to throw it into your brains now. If Merab Dvalishvili can retain his title in the main event and have 4 title defenses, and Alexandre Pantoja can retain in the co-main event with his 5th title defense, I think that will absolutely line these two up for a super fight, a champion versus champion matchup in the first half of 2026, and what could be another monumental moment for both the bantamweight and flyweight divisions respectively. Back to the bantamweight division we go, because we will see the former 2-weight world champion and Olympic gold medalist Henry Cejudo back once again in his 4th fight post-retirement, taking on the unranked but highly touted prospect Payton Talbott in a fight that nobody saw coming. Henry Cejudo's last victory was in May of 2020 at UFC 249 in the middle of the pandemic. As a matter of fact, that was the first card back from the pandemic for the UFC, and he defeated Dominic Cruz to retain his bantamweight championship and then subsequently retired in the aftermath of his knockout victory. And then after nearly 3 years away on the dot, May 9th is when he retired and May 6th of 2023 is when he returned. He came back to take on Aljamain Sterling for the bantamweight championship of the world and would lose a split decision, and has followed that up with 2 more losses, going 0-3 in his comeback era. And the other 2 losses, Merab Dvalishvili, the current champion, and most recently back at UFC Seattle in February of this year against Song Yadong in a fight that ended in a technical decision due to an eye poke on the side of Song given to Henry Cejudo, and he couldn't continue the bout, but it had went on long enough to where a decision could be had on the scorecards. And as for the 27-year-old Payton Talbott, he is 4-1 in the UFC thus far, and just had a bounce-back win at UFC 317 on International Fight Week by getting a decision over Felipe Lima, and I say bounce-back because just before that he suffered the first loss of his career back at UFC 311, where he would get dominated by Raoni Barcelos. But now with momentum behind him once again, the UFC is absolutely strapping the rocket to this guy's back, putting him up against the 10th ranked Henry Cejudo, one of the biggest names still in the bantamweight division regardless of his lack of success as of late. And if he wins, he will be a top 10 bantamweight in the world after just 6 UFC fights. And it definitely feels to me like a potential second retirement for Henry Cejudo, because even if he gets a victory over Talbot, what what really does that do for him in the current state of this bantamweight division? After all, you just heard me talk about everything going on in the top half of the 135 weight class right now, and Henry Cejudo just isn't really a part of that discussion, if I'm being quite honest. And if he loses, that would be 4 losses in a row since coming out of retirement. What other fights are there really for him to pursue? I think nada. Also on the main card will be the former light heavyweight champion Jan Blachowicz taking on the surging Bogdan Guskov, who has not lost since his UFC debut and is on a tear right now. The 42-year-old Blachowicz will enter this fight off of a loss to Carlos Alberg back at UFC London in March in a relatively lackluster back-and-forth 15-minute bout. And since then, we've seen what Carlos Alberg has turned that victory into. He catapulted that into a first-round knockout over Dominic Reyes, and now I believe is the #1 contender in the light heavyweight division. Will he be fighting Alex Pereira for the title next? That's a different discussion. And for the 33-year-old out of Uzbekistan, 9 years younger than the former champ Blachowicz, he will enter this fight on a 4-fight win streak, all 4 of them by way of stoppage, 2 in round 2 and 2 in round 1, and most recently was against Nikita Krylov back in July at UFC Saudi Arabia, a perennially ranked top 15 light heavyweight. So Bogdan Guskov is absolutely a player in this light heavyweight division and presents a very dangerous threat to the aging Blachowicz, who's looking to prove that he still has plenty of gas left in the tank for maybe one more championship run before he calls it quits. And lastly, we head back to the flyweight division because we will see the former 2-time champion Brandon Moreno, who currently sits at number 2 in the world, taking on Tatsuro Taira, who sits at number 5. And you gotta think that just on paper, the winner of this fight will get the winner of Pantoja versus Van in the co-main event of the evening. Of course, that is if Pantoja doesn't go up and challenge Merab for the bantamweight title, assuming he beats Van. And also assuming that if Van beats Pantoja, they don't run back an immediate rematch due to Pantoja's success as a champion thus far. But still, it's a #1 contendership fight. Give me that. For the assassin baby Brandon Moreno, he will enter this UFC 323 bout on a 2-fight win streak over Steve Erceg, the former title challenger. That one came in May of this year, and prior to that was a near shutout performance over Amir Albazi back in November of 2024, who at that point was undefeated in the UFC. And for his opponent and number 5 ranked Tatsuro Taira, who is still just 25 years young, he will enter this fight off of the heels of a victory against Hyung-Sung Park, where he submitted him in round 2 of their short notice main event back in August. And prior to that fight with Park, Tatsuro Taira suffered the first loss of his UFC career and of his entire professional career, and that was at the hands of Brandon Royval over the course of a 25-minute split decision where they would have one of the more high-level bouts of all of 2024, especially in the flyweight division. But prior to that, Taira was 6-0 in the UFC and riding a ton of momentum, including TKO victories over Alex Perez and Carlos Hernandez, and submission wins over CJ Vergara and Jesus Aguilar. So he is absolutely one of the most elite level talents in this flyweight division, but this is a big step up from Hyung-Sung Park to Brandon Moreno, who has held gold twice before and is looking to reach it a 3rd time. So I want to get all of your way too early predictions for UFC 323 down in the comments below. What do you make of this final pay-per-view card, potentially ever in the UFC's history? It's looking pretty damn stacked to me, and there's some other rumored bouts that might even take place on this card as well that haven't been finalized or announced just yet. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new, because every single week I break down and preview the biggest and best fights heading into each card. I recap the most meaningful results in the aftermath, and much like this, I give my thoughts and opinions on MMA news and fight announcements. Not to mention, our channel is on the road to reaching 1,000 subscribers, and the goal is to do so before the end of 2025, so any and all support would be greatly appreciated. You can also join the discussion on social media at Verbal Spar MMA on X, Instagram, and TikTok, as well as like the Facebook page Verbal Sparring MMA, and you can follow on your favorite podcast listening platforms such as Spotify and Apple, where episodes release there every Monday and Friday. Have a great week, and I will see you all in the next video.